So I was quite shocked to receive an invitation to be the opening preacher at the Academy of Young Preachers because I was still a young preacher. And the leader of the Academy of Young Preachers in 2012 said, I want you to open up the conference this year. I was terrified. I was filled with angst and anxiety because here I am, 21 years old, opening up for the other young preachers. They had 10 to 15 minutes to preach, and here I am, the opening preacher. Take as long as you want, 20, 25, that's a lot of pressure for a 21-year-old. And the day came, and I successfully preached one of the worst sermons of my ministry. I just could not believe how bad it, and you know what happened? I decided that I should not preach what the Spirit told me to preach. I should preach what felt safe because I wanted to impress those in the room. I didn't want them to think that I couldn't preach and you put me up as the opening preacher. I had to go with what was safe, and I successfully preached one of the worst sermons of my ministry. It was 2012. I had just been preaching, started preaching at the age of 15 in 2006, so I'm a young preacher still learning. Let's go to 2013. I've now graduated Morehouse College, and I am at Yale Divinity School. I was accepted on a full ride scholarship to Yale Divinity School, fresh out of Morehouse College. Fall 2013, I received the William Sloan Coffin Scholarship. Full ride, paid for to go to Yale. I arrived in New Haven, Connecticut, and guess what? It was cold and it was cold. It was cold by late September as far as weather, and the culture was so much colder than what I was accustomed to in Atlanta, Georgia, coming out of Morehouse College, a historically black college and university. It was just different. And then the sun would go down around 3:30. I would call my friends back in Atlanta and say, hey, is the sun still up? Oh yes, the sun is shining. The sun is in the middle of the sky. And here I am sitting in the dark, and SAD crept in, SAD, seasonal affective disorder. And because I was so far away from home, a 22-year-old, not really understanding what it means to live this far away from home for the first time. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm living in New Haven, Connecticut. What a splendid place to be. And not only did SAD creep in, depression crept in as well. And there I sat in the dark, in the cold, trying my best to remain a first-year student at Yale Divinity School. Then life kept lifing, and I began to pastor in Macon, Georgia for 3.5 years. After some time with a break, I began to pastor and lead a church called Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church in Chicago, Illinois. Reverend Clay Evans, gospel music icon, founded that church in 1950. Pastor Charles Jenkins served that church for 20 years. After Reverend Evans served that church for 50 years. It's a historic black church in the city of Chi-Town, the home of Harold's and Giordano's deep dish pizza. And here I am, a Southerner from Atlanta in Chicago, and I get to the church with all of these degrees. I've gone to Morehouse. I've now left Yale. I have graduated from Vanderbilt. I've graduated from Candler School of Theology. I am now about to be in a PhD program. I'm the youngest preacher to preach the morning service at Hampton Ministers Conference, and I get to fellowship, and there is a gentleman there who is not impressed at all with my preaching. And one day I made a mistake and asked him, do you see anything I could work on as a younger pastor? Made a mistake and asked. And I'm thinking he's going to critique my administration abilities and maybe give me some ideas for the society and working with some social justice projects. And he tells me, I don't hear any of your degrees when you preach. I stayed in therapy for 3 months trying to figure all this out. Every scenario, every story, every life experience that I just named for you is captured in what I call, I was faced with the fourth temptation. If you go over to the Lucan account, if you go over to the book of Luke, chapter 4, there you will see that Jesus is led into the wilderness and he faces the temptations. And normally we only talk about the 3 temptations. Turn these, Satan asks him, the devil asks him, turn these stones into bread. And then there's another temptation, jump off the cliff and the angels will catch you. And then another temptation, if you bow down, I'll give you everything that you can see. Now, in African American culture, we would say the devil is a liar. But it's a temptation. And Henry Nouwen, in his book called In the Name of Jesus, he breaks down each temptation. He says the temptation to turn the stones into bread was a temptation to be relevant. The temptation to jump off the cliff and the angels will catch you. Henry Nouwen argues it's the temptation to be spectacular. And then if you bow down and sell your soul, kind of like what happened in the recent election. If you just bow down and sell your soul, you'll get power. It's the temptation to be powerful. And all of these temptations are dangerous, and Jesus had to confront each temptation. I'm not here to be relevant. I'm here to express the love of God. I'm not here to be spectacular. I'm here to remain as grounded as I can be. I'm not here to be powerful because the God I serve already has all power, and I am an extension of the God I already trust. But there is another subtle temptation that we miss. It happens early in the narrative. Satan says, if you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. There you find the temptation to prove who you are. That temptation will grip you in a way that's hard to articulate because there's so many voices, there's so many opinions, there's so many dark days, there's so many moments when you show up and you feel inside, I'm not enough. You have the degree and still don't feel like you're enough. Your family has prayed for you. Your ancestors are still in your ear, but you still show up and you wonder if you are enough. And I'm here to tell you that you have nothing to prove because you've already been approved. And I had to realize I don't have anything to prove to anybody because I've already been approved. Before Jesus was led into the wilderness, he was baptized in a Jordan River. And the heavens opened and a voice spoke down, his own Father. God said, you are my son in whom I'm well pleased. Why are we living lives? Why, Sharpe, did you live so long trying to prove who you are? We've already been approved. And so that young preacher in 2012 who preached successfully the worst, best sermon of his ministry, he began to pray a prayer that has carried him on to this moment. That young preacher, 21 years old, led to this 33-year-old standing before you today who began to pray, Lord, deliver me from the pressure to perform and replace the pressure to perform with preaching peace and preaching power. That young man who wrestled at Yale Divinity School with sad and depression had to wrestle with one of his friends one day and say, I don't know how long I can stay here. What are people going to say if I leave Yale? Who walks away from Yale on a full ride? What will my family think? What will people think? What will my church think? What will Yale think of me? And my friend said to me, Dane Jones, he said, is Yale the name that has carried you this far? He said, what name has carried you this far? I said, the name Jesus. He said, well, that name won't change. And while Yale is a big name, so is the name Jesus. And I had to withdraw from that experience, go back home for a season to recover in my own wilderness, so that I could then apply to Vanderbilt and continue on the trajectory. That young pastor in 2021 who was told, I don't hear any of your degrees in your preaching, had to go to therapy, because sometimes you can have theology and you still need to go to therapy. Sometimes you can have Christ and you still need a counselor. Sometimes you can sit on a pew on Sunday but need to sit on a couch on Tuesday. We need a place to process what we're hit with. And many of us don't go to therapy for others. We really don't go to therapy for ourselves. We go to therapy for all the people that won't go to therapy. And I had to process that you're enough. Maybe, sir, maybe, ma'am, I'm not your cup of tea, but that might be because my cup runneth over. I might not be not enough. I might be too much for you. And just because I'm not your cup of tea doesn't mean I can't still help people, taste and see that the Lord is good. See, when you wrestle with that fourth temptation, there are a couple things that we all have to sow into our hearts and sow into our spirits. You have to understand that there's a difference between work and worth. Because before Jesus did anything, God said, I'm already pleased with you. So many times we define our worth by our productivity, but we have to understand that our productivity does not define our identity. And so before you do anything, because you committed yourself to God, God is already pleased with you. Before you prove your intelligence, before you prove your productivity, before you prove that you deserve the position or you deserve the heights that you attain, know that God is already whispering in all of our spirits, you are my beloved daughter, you are my beloved son, you are my beloved child, and I am pleased with you simply because you breathe and because you represent my image in the earth. We have to understand the difference between work and worth. And we have to understand the difference between doing and being, because Satan said, if you're the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. Interesting. You're going to tell the one who is bread to turn stones into bread? Because I don't have to do it. I am it. I am what you're asking me to show you. So all you have to do is look at me, and I'm not just bread, but Jesus is also the stone that the builders rejected. So how dare you, Satan, ask Jesus to show you what he can do when you will get so much more from him if you just watched him be? Because your being is more important than your doing. It's work versus worth. It's doing versus being, and it's impressing versus impacting. Jump off and let's watch the angels catch you. Bow down and get all of this power. Turn the stones into bread. Impress us. But you weren't called to impress people. You were called to impact people. Once I was preaching and I found out that somebody offered a critique that they still don't know to this day that I know. And they said he wasn't very impressive. And I said, wonderful, because I wasn't trying to impress you. I was trying to impact you. I wanted to make an impact somehow. And when you face that fourth temptation, you'll move from working to knowing your worth. You'll move from doing to just breathing in your being. And you'll move from trying to be impressive to trying to be as impactful as you can be. Let me tell you a story I know you won't believe. One day I was in my driveway at home in Ellenwood, Georgia, and I walked up on a worm. And the worm started talking to me. I said, how you doing, Mr. Worm? The worm looked up at me and said, all of you are the same. You keep mistaking me for a worm, and I'm not a worm. I said, well, you look like a worm. You slither like a worm. You're small like a worm. He said, I'm not a worm. I'm a caterpillar. And he said, if you just give me a little time, if you just let me grow, if you let me have a season of isolation and let me wrap myself in myself and spend some time in a chrysalis, one day I'll be wrapped in my own self and I'll be growing in privacy. I'll be growing where no one can see me, but I will end up pushing myself out of my own cocoon and chrysalis, and the pushing makes my wings stronger. Don't cut me open, let me push. Because every time I push, strength comes back to me. He said, I look like a worm, but I'm a caterpillar. And today you may walk over me, but one day I can fly over you. And then he said, but I won't just fly over you, I'll fly for you so you can see how good it looks to be free. Thank you.